We're talking about how to visually organize your photos today using lines, shapes, textures, positive, negative space, repetition, contrast. Things that are kind of like called the elements of art and the principles of design. Ready? Here we go. One of the first things we're going to talk about is lines. Lines are everywhere, especially when you're looking for them in a photograph. Over here on the left, you see we have a photo that is basically made up of all lines. We've got like tree roots coming through the snow, which is taking up a good chunk of our photo. Lines can be thick, they can be thin, they can be wavy, dotted, faint, bold. There are so many different kinds of lines. Over here on the right, we have like a top-down view from like a helicopter of a road after Hurricane Katrina. We have kind of like a railroad, which are our straight parallel lines. We've got perpendicular lines going through. We have these big, wavy, curvy power lines that came through. We have the lines of the street that kind of dominate the photo. So lines are the main subject in this photo. So what you're looking for is compositions that grab your attention with line before anything else. So we have these power lines where maybe it's a top down of kind of maybe a bridge. This is maybe what a bird sees when they're flying over a bridge. Uh, so your lines are leading you in from the side of the photo, and then you have those two parallel lines dragging you through. Your eyes can't help but kind of be pulled by the lines. And then on the left here, we have kind of more of an organic shaped line that's not quite as straight or predictable. It's kind of twisting you through the image. Shapes, oops, my text got covered up a little bit. Shapes are another thing that can organize your photo. They can be geometric, which is more like over here on the left, or they can be a little bit more organic, like our fish on a hook over here on the right. So geometric shapes are going to be more like your square, your triangle, your rectangle, your trapezoid, things that follow geometric rules. Organic shapes are going to be more like your natural, I want to say organic, but I can't explain the word with the word. So something that's a little bit more natural, isn't confined by a rule. So these kind of blobby shapes and the shape of the fish and the hook, those are more organic shapes than over on the left you have more like triangles and rectangles and trapezoids. So between these two photos, which photo feels more organic in shape? Which photo feels more geometric in shape? The windows or the spill? What is it? What do you think? Texture is another way we can organize our photo. Texture can document the interesting nuances of a subject. So if you are zooming in on something, this is actually like a piece of lettuce or a piece of cabbage, but the texture in there is heightened by the lights and the shadows. So it becomes this interesting thing. And it's also a lot of line, isn't it? It's a lot of line. And then over on the right, you have lots of textures in a single photo. You have the texture of the rock that contrasts with the texture of the sky, which is very kind of misty. And then speaking of mist, we have literal mist leading us up into these like really crumbly rocks. So there's lots of contrast in texture here that's making you feel like you're immersed in the landscape. There are all different kinds of textures you can document with your camera. Let me move my face. Textures are literally everywhere. Text, like when you zoom in with your camera, you can get some textures that your eyes can't even see. So textures are rough, bumpy, smooth, gritty. The cactus, I'm obsessed with taking pictures of my cactuses. I love to get super zoomed in. I have one right now that looks like a little daisy, like little starbursts. It's really cute. Um, Textures are a great way to focus your composition. Positive and negative space. I'm so sorry for this overlapping. That looks terrible. Objects can create a positive space. So the roads here are your positive space. The area around those objects is your negative space. So the sky is your negative space. The space in between the pillars is your negative space. Lines and objects often cut up the background into smaller chunks. So if you can start looking at the negative space as a shape, as an important part of your photo, that will really help you. The background space becomes activated when it's cut up into interesting shapes. So positive and negative space is all about the space between or the space around, but it's definitely about capturing interesting shapes in between objects, or capturing maybe the space around something to bring more attention to the main object. Here's a great example of positive and negative space. So when objects are combined on a diagonal, I've seen a couple people do this actually with their dogs already. It does help break up the space, as opposed to the dogs being parallel, kind of breaks up the space in a diagonal way, so your eyes are not getting lost in the photo. Repetition. When lines, shapes, colors, or objects are repeated, it feels like a repetition or a rhythm. So your eyes really like rhythm in photos. Here's more examples of rhythm and repetition. So things repeating themselves, or stacking, or overlapping. Objects don't always have to be identical when you're doing repetition. They should have something in common, but they don't need to be exactly the same. So you can see like the shadows on these chairs will change as the light changes, or we have these cars in a swamp. So not all the cars are the same, but there's something that ties them all together. The positive negative space is also something that is repeated in these photos, so that's kind of another layer on top. Contrast. So when visual opposites appear in a photo, you have contrast, like black and white. We have organic and man-made here. We have like bricks and we have moss. So there's things that are made by man and things that are made by nature. That's a nice contrast. We have vertical stripes and horizontal stripes, which is a great contrast as well. It might be a conceptual opposite. So it's not always something that's very obvious, but maybe it's a conceptual contrast, not like a visual contrast. So what is the opposite that's shown in this image? Think about it. Come back to me. I want you to be prepared to talk about at least 3 different kinds of contrast in this photo for our next class together. Okay? What 3 pieces of contrast do you see in this photo? Here's your assignment. You're going to have 6 photos on our due date. You must have 1 photo for each of the following: a line photo, a photo that distinguishes shape, a photo that shows texture, positive and negative space, repetition, and contrast. Okay? That is no longer our website, so don't try that. I will post your rubric on Google Classroom. Okay? Your photos should have good lighting, have at least 1 area in focus, avoid motion blur unless it's on purpose, have little to no noise, full range from dark to light, interesting angles, use your active choices. Please make sure there's no clutter or distracting objects in your photos. Yay.